I'm so grateful you're here with me tonight. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me what city or state you're watching from. I read every single one. Welcome back to the channel. A quick note before we begin. Some details in this story have been adjusted for narrative and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real names or places is coincidental, but the lesson inside it is worth every minute. 4 hours before I understood the full shape of what was happening to my family, my grandson Tyler was showing my son-in-law how to whittle a piece of pine into a rough little boat, and my son-in-law was laughing in that easy, warm way that made everyone at the table feel like the luckiest people in the world to know him. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years as a fire marshal for the city of Columbus, Ohio. And in that time, I learned one thing better than almost anyone I've ever met. The most dangerous fires are never the ones that announce themselves. They're the ones that smolder quietly behind a wall for hours before anybody smells smoke. Daniel Ashford gave everybody in that dining room a reason to feel safe. End quote. He was 39, tall, soft-spoken, the kind of man who remembered your birthday and your dog's name and asked about your knee surgery 6 weeks after you'd mentioned it once. 3 years earlier, he'd started a nonprofit called Harvest Home, which helped elderly homeowners in rural Ohio avoid foreclosure by connecting them with grant money and legal aid. The Columbus Dispatch had run a feature on him with the headline, "The Man Who Keeps Grandma in Her House." The governor's office had sent him a certificate of recognition that hung, framed, in his office. I'd been proud of my daughter Rachel for finding him. That was before tonight. My wife Carol had spent 2 days on Thanksgiving dinner, a turkey brine since Tuesday, sweet potatoes with the little marshmallows Tyler loved, and a pumpkin pie cooling on the counter since 2 in the afternoon. Our dining room smelled like cinnamon and wood smoke from the fireplace we'd lit that morning. And outside the window, the first snow of the season was coming down soft and slow, the kind that makes a street look like a photograph of itself. Rachel sat across from me in the green sweater Carol had knitted her 2 Christmases ago. Tyler, 6 years old, sat between his parents, more interested in his mashed potatoes than the conversation, until he wasn't. Everyone was laughing at something Daniel had said when Rachel suddenly turned to me and asked, "Dad, do you still keep Grandpa Joe's old fishing lure in your tackle box?" My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. 22 years. She hadn't used that question in 22 years, not since she was 16, and a substitute teacher at her high school had started finding reasons to be alone with her after class. And she hadn't known how to say it out loud at the dinner table in front of her mother without sounding dramatic, without maybe being wrong. So we'd built a question instead. Sitting right there at our kitchen table one Sunday afternoon, something ordinary enough that no one else would blink, something that would mean everything to just the two of us. I set my fork down slowly and picked up my water glass instead. "Still got it," I said, "right where it's always been." Across the table, Daniel smiled at me, the same warm smile he always wore. But something behind his eyes had shifted, just slightly, like a man recalculating. "I want to be honest with you about something before I go further into this story. When Rachel asked me that question when she was 16, I promised her I would always answer it seriously, no matter how strange or small it seemed. I promised her that if she ever asked it again, I would move heaven and earth before I let anything happen to her. 22 years is a long time to hold a promise. I want you to remember that promise as we go, because everything I did over the next 11 days, I did because of it. Rachel had met Daniel 4 years earlier, at a fundraising gala for Harvest Home that a friend from her accounting firm had dragged her to. She told me about him on the phone that same week, practically breathless how kind he was, how he'd spent 20 minutes talking to an elderly widow about her late husband's tomato garden instead of working the room for donors, how he seemed to actually care about people instead of performing caring the way so many charity men do. I remember feeling something loosen in my chest when I heard that. Rachel had been through a difficult marriage before, one that ended quietly and painfully, and I'd wanted nothing more in the world than to see her happy again. Daniel made her happy. He made all of us feel steady. That was the whole trick of him, though I wouldn't understand that for another 11 days. After dinner, while Carol was doing dishes and Daniel and Tyler were out back building a lopsided snowman under the porch light, Rachel found an excuse to walk me out to my truck for something from the garage. The moment the kitchen door shut behind us, her whole posture changed. She wrapped her arms around herself even though it wasn't that cold. "Dad, I need you to listen to me and not react," she said. "Just listen." I told her I was listening. 3 days ago, I found something on Daniel's laptop. I wasn't snooping, Dad, I swear. I was just looking for the recipe he saved for that cranberry sauce we all liked last year, and I found a folder. It had bank statements in it. Not Harvest Home statements, personal ones, from an account I didn't recognize, with a name I didn't recognize on it, Marcus Whitfield. I asked her how much money. Almost $200,000 moved through it in the last 4 months alone, she said. And Dad, some of the deposits came from people I know. Older people. People from Harvest Home's donor list. People he's supposed to be helping. And I felt something cold settle into my stomach. The particular coldness of a man who has spent 3 decades learning to recognize the moment before something catches fire. Have you told anyone else? No. I didn't know who to trust. I didn't know if I was imagining it, making something out of nothing. But then this morning I got an email. Anonymous. It just said, "Ask your father about the fishing lure. Trust him with this. Not your husband." My hands went cold on the truck door. Someone sent you that? Who? I don't know. But Dad, whoever it is, they know about the code. They know about us. And I don't think they'd know that unless they'd been watching us for a long, long time. I want to pause here and tell you something about the 11 days that followed, because I've turned them over so many times since that I could probably tell you every hour of it in my sleep. This wasn't a story that moved fast. It moved the way real danger actually moves. Slow, patient, and quiet. Hiding behind ordinary Tuesday afternoons. Waiting for the one moment your guard finally comes down. That night, after Daniel and Rachel and Tyler had gone home, I sat in my study with a legal pad and a pen, the same way I used to when I was still working arson cases. And I wrote down everything Rachel had told me. Marcus Whitfield, $200,000. Donor names. An anonymous email that knew about a code 22 years old. I had a friend from my fire marshal days named Gerald Okafor, retired now from Columbus PD's Financial Crimes Unit, the kind of man who still kept his badge in his coat pocket out of habit. I called him the next morning and asked him, carefully, without saying too much, whether the name Marcus Whitfield meant anything to him. It took him 4 days to call me back. When he did, his voice had a weight to it I didn't like. "Walter, where did you hear that name?" I told him enough to be honest without putting Rachel in the middle of it yet. Marcus Whitfield was the CFO of a senior assistance charity outside of Reno 8 years ago, Gerald said. Embezzled almost $4 million from an elder care trust fund. Staged a car accident off a mountain road right before the indictment came down. Case got closed as an accidental death. Except, he paused, and I could hear him flipping through something. Case. Except 3 months ago, a facial recognition sweep run through a federal database, as part of an unrelated investigation, flagged a 94% match between Marcus Whitfield's old driver's license photo and an Ohio nonprofit director named Daniel Ashford. I sat down slowly in my chair. "Walter," Gerald said, "whoever's married to your daughter is not who he says he is." I didn't sleep that night. I want to be honest with you about that too. There is a particular kind of sleeplessness that comes from realizing the man sitting across your Thanksgiving table, teaching your grandson to whittle a boat, has already killed one version of himself once to escape consequences, and might be capable of doing it again to anyone standing in his way. Over the next several days, working quietly through Gerald's old contacts and a young federal analyst named Priya Chandrasekaran who Gerald trusted, we started pulling the thread further. What we found didn't just confirm what Rachel had stumbled onto. It was worse, and it was bigger. Harvest Home wasn't just a foreclosure assistance nonprofit. It was a pipeline. Daniel Marcus, I should say, though it took me days to stop thinking of him by the name my grandson called Uncle Danny, had spent 3 years identifying elderly homeowners who were behind on their mortgages, offering them emergency grant assistance, and in exchange, having them sign what they believed were standard grant acceptance documents. Buried in the paperwork, drafted by a lawyer named Rosalind Fain, who Priya discovered had done identical work for Marcus Whitfield's Nevada operation 8 years earlier, were limited power of attorney clauses that gave Harvest Home, meaning Daniel, quiet authority over the homeowners' bank accounts. 11 donors, all over the age of 70, all with minimal family oversight, had unknowingly signed their financial independence over to a dead man wearing a new face. There was a gala coming up in 9 days, Harvest Home's annual fundraiser, held at a hotel ballroom downtown, the same event where Rachel had first met him 4 years earlier. Priya found records showing Daniel had scheduled a routine account consolidation for the 11 donor accounts to take place the night of the gala, when everyone's attention, including any auditors, would be elsewhere. I remember sitting in my study with that information in front of me and feeling exactly what I used to feel walking into a building where I knew, before I even smelled the smoke, that something underneath the floor was already burning. I called Rachel that night and told her I needed her to trust me completely for the next several days, that I needed her to keep behaving normally around Daniel, that her safety and Tyler's safety depended on him not knowing what we knew until we were ready. "Dad, I'm scared," she said, and her voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since she was 16 years old, standing in our kitchen trying to explain, without quite explaining, why she didn't want to walk home from school alone anymore. "I know," I told her. "I've got you." Just like I said I would. The next several days moved like a held breath. Rachel cooked Daniel's favorite dinners. She laughed at his jokes. She let him read Tyler his bedtime story every night. And every night after Daniel fell asleep, she quietly photographed whatever new documents crossed the kitchen table, sent them to a secure folder Priya had set up, and lay awake beside a man she now understood might not exist. 4 days before the gala, Gerald called me with something that made my hands shake for the first time since this whole thing started. "Walter, we pulled his financials from the last 72 hours. He's accelerated. Someone tipped him off, maybe nothing you did, maybe he's just cautious by nature, but he's moved the consolidation date up. It's happening tomorrow night, not at the gala, tomorrow. And Walter, he's booked a flight out of Port Columbus for 2 nights from now, one way, Panama City. He's planning to disappear again," I said. "He's planning to disappear again," Gerald agreed. "And Walter, listen to me carefully. People like this, when their timeline gets compressed and they feel cornered, they don't just run. Sometimes they clean up loose ends first. I don't want to scare you, but your daughter needs to hear this tonight." I drove to Rachel's house myself instead of calling. Some things you don't say over the phone. I found her in the kitchen, Tyler already asleep upstairs, Daniel out at what he'd told her was a donor dinner. I told her everything Gerald had told me. I watched her face go through fear, and then something harder. Something I recognized because I'd seen it in my own mirror 30 years earlier. The first time I walked into a building I knew wasn't safe, and understood. I had to go in anyway. "What do we do?" she said. Not a question. A decision already forming. "We let Priya and Gerald build the case fast enough to move before he does," I said. "And you and Tyler come stay with your mother and me tonight. No arguments." She packed a bag for herself, and for Tyler, in 11 minutes. I remember timing it without meaning to, the old fire marshal habit of counting seconds in a crisis. We were loading the car when Daniel's truck pulled into the driveway 2 hours earlier than expected. He got out slowly. He looked at the suitcase in Rachel's hand, at Tyler half asleep against her shoulder, at me standing by my truck in the cold, and for the first time in 4 years, I watched every trace of warmth drain out of his face like a light switching off, and underneath it was something with no expression at all, not anger, not panic, just a flat, assessing calm, the look of a man doing arithmetic. "Going somewhere," he said. Not a question either. "Tyler has a fever," Rachel said, her voice steadier than I could have managed. "We're taking him to Mom and Dad's. It's closer to the pediatrician's after-hours clinic." Daniel looked at Tyler, who did, in fact, look flushed from sleep, and for 3 long seconds, nobody in that driveway breathed. "Let me help you. Get his car seat," Daniel said finally, and walked toward Rachel's car. That's when I saw Gerald's sedan turn the corner onto the street, 2 houses down, exactly on schedule, and I understood we had perhaps 90 seconds before Daniel understood the same thing. He must have seen it too, in the reflection off a parked car's window, or maybe he simply felt it the way men like him always seem to feel a closing door. He straightened up from the back seat without the car seat in his hands and looked at Rachel with an expression I will remember until the day I die, not rage, not desperation, just a kind of tired disappointment, as if she'd broken a rule he genuinely believed she understood. "You should have just asked me for a divorce," he said quietly. "This was so much more than necessary." Step away from the car, Daniel," I said, and I put myself between him and my daughter, the same way I'd put myself between a family and a burning doorway more times than I could count in 31 years. He didn't run. That surprised me more than anything else that happened that night. He simply stood there, hands visible, watching Gerald's car and the second unmarked vehicle behind it pull up along the curb, watching 2 agents step out, watching the last version of his careful, constructed life end in a quiet suburban driveway, under a streetlight. with the first snow of the season still melting on the pavement. They took him without incident. He didn't look at me again. He looked, just once, at Tyler, still half asleep on Rachel's shoulder, and something crossed his face that I couldn't name and didn't want to. The trial took 9 months. I sat behind Rachel every single day it was in session. The evidence Priya's team built was, according to the federal prosecutor, one of the most thorough elder financial exploitation cases the Southern District of Ohio had ever tried. 11 victims, 3 prior aliases going back 17 years, and a pattern of predation so precise it had its own internal logic, like a man who had simply decided kindness was a tool to be used rather than a thing to be. When the verdict came down, 61 years, no possibility of parole, on charges of wire fraud, identity theft, exploitation of the elderly, and obstruction. Rachel was asked if she wanted to address the court. She stood, smoothed her blazer once, the way I'd taught her to do before a difficult conversation, and walked to the podium. "I used to think you could tell a dangerous person by how they made you feel afraid," she said, her voice clear and steady in a way that made my chest ache with pride. I was wrong. The most dangerous person I ever knew made me feel safer than anyone else in my life. He was patient, and he was gentle, and he read my son bedtime stories in a voice that never once wavered. I think that's what I want people to understand. Evil doesn't usually announce itself. Sometimes it just quietly puts down roots and waits. She sat back down beside me, and I took her hand, the way I had every single day of that trial, and I felt, for the first time in almost a year, something enormous finally set itself down. Outside the courthouse, Carol was waiting on the steps with Tyler, who was holding a paper airplane he'd folded out of his old school worksheet. The moment he saw his mother, he ran to her, and she caught him and lifted him and buried her face in his neck for a long moment. "Is the bad man gone now?" Tyler asked, pulling back to study her face with that particular seriousness only a 6-year-old can manage. "Yes, baby," Rachel said. "He's gone." Tyler considered this with great care. Then he held up his paper airplane. "Can we go get hot chocolate?" Rachel laughed, really laughed, for what I realized was the first time in nearly a year, and the sound of it went through me like the first warm afternoon after a long winter. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely. Yes." I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the old fishing lure there, the one I'd carried with me every day since that Thanksgiving. It hadn't caught a fish in 11 years. It had been holding something else instead. Looking back, I wasn't a hero in this story. I was a father who almost waited too long. That was my version of protecting my family. Not anger, not revenge, but the quiet, stubborn decision to act before the damage became something we couldn't undo. Family doesn't always look out for itself in dramatic ways. Sometimes it looks like a retired fire marshal sitting up at night with a legal pad, counting the seconds the way he was trained to, refusing to let the people he loves burn. I believe the right people came together at the right time for us. Gerald, with his old badge. Priya with her patience. Carol with the dinner that kept our family gathered at one table long enough for a code, 22 years old, to still mean something. Here's what I want to leave you with tonight. Don't wait for a code you built decades ago to be the only thing that saves you. Trust the small, uncomfortable feelings sooner. Ask the hard questions sooner. Love is worth the difficult conversation every single time. If someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. If this story moved you, tell me one word in the comments that describes how you're feeling right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe, because the stories still coming will stay with you a long time. Thank you for staying with me until the end. It means more than you know. One more note before our next story. Some of what's coming contains fictionalized elements, meant purely for reflection and education. If that's not for you, that's completely all right. Choose what serves you best.